I used to wonder if my story really mattered. Maybe you felt that too. Like your experience was too messy, too personal, or not far enough along to share. But here's what I've learned. Your story is your superpower. It's not just what you've been through, it's how you got through it. And when you know how to tell that story with purpose, you don't just inspire, you connect, you serve, and you start making the impact you were born to make. That's why I created Becoming a Storyteller and Creating Impact. It's a self-paced course to help you craft your story, speak with confidence, and start using your voice to truly make a difference. Whether you're a new coach, a speaker, or someone who just knows they were meant for more, this is your starting point. It's going to change how you see yourself and your story. Check out the link in the podcast notes and get registered today. Don't wait to make a difference. Welcome back to It's Your Story to Tell. If you haven't listened to part 1, I would encourage you to go and start there. I love when I talk to people about the difference that they're making in the world using the pain that they went through. I think it's really important that you hear about his journey and how he got here. He didn't just magically show up with these answers for himself and for the path that he's been on to break off of generational trauma, the trauma of losing his son to suicide, battling cancer. All of these things have taught him a way to move forward. And I'm just really excited, Andy, for you to share a little bit about the 15 principles that you now live by. And then how can people learn more about this, get your book or connect with you to be able to see if you might be one of those people who offers a different solution or a different path for them if they're feeling stuck and nothing's been working for them.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the way you framed that, because what I would say, the book is kind of broken into 2 parts. One is the core beliefs, these 15 ideals, aspirational goals, okay? Because you don't, in all transparency, I fail at them every day. They kind of are the mark that I turn to, that I want to achieve, but, I don't achieve them every day. But they remind me that I am off course, right? They remind me to come back to them. The second part of the book is just, more about kind of practices, when you're going through setbacks, or you're working to come back from a traumatic event. I call them setbacks, but that in some ways lessens the impact that they have, right? But these traumatic things that have happened, and those don't have to be, major things like pancreatic cancer. They can be a number of things that have happened, a setback in a relationship. So, I do not pretend or suppose that you use these and life will be immediately better. I think you mentioned in the first episode about, not kind of turning over the answers to other people. Like, people can kind of give you some insights they have, or maybe some wisdom that they have accumulated. And, and you fail, or you stumble. And my grandfather used to have a saying, experience is what you get just after you needed it. And so, if you have stumbled and you have failed, just remember that's how people get wisdom. That's how they become a little wiser. Even if over your lifespan you don't achieve wise, you can become wiser. And that's usually from experience, and experience is what you get just after you needed it. So it kind of comes along with a stumble, or what we might think of as a failure. And so the core beliefs that I have are not an end game. They're not, if I do these things, I will be successful. They are things that are kind of on the journey to finding the things that will help you through life, that will help you come back from a setback. So they are kind of mindset oriented, because I like what you said about, we can't turn over to someone else and just like, you give me the answer, I'll check the box and I can move on. Right? Like, these are things that I would look at for how I got to a place where EMDR could help me. And then I applied them in the process of changing the way I behaved after I processed the emotions, right? So they're like the connective tissue between these events, where I was and where I want to be. So, there's a few that, I won't run through all 15, but there are some, like I said, history doesn't repeat itself. Humans repeat history. To me, that's a choice. I can look at something and I can either think, "Wow, I'm going to respond. Am I responding right now the way I did, and I didn't get the outcome I wanted? Because if I respond the same way, I'm probably going to get the same outcome." So that's me repeating history. History doesn't have to be that way. No, I think I mentioned in the first episode, no one outruns the universe. It's an exhausting thing to do to try to, the universe is designed in a certain way, it functions a certain way. It has guardrails for how life occurs. And so, sometimes the universe, in my opinion, God designs the universe to kind of help nudge you in a direction, sometimes more than a nudge. But I've often found that it's better to confront things when the universe kind of,
Nudges,
prompts you, nudges, because
whispers
eventually
versus screams.
it will force, and that's a lot more painful than the nudge. And I also think that's one way to think about, one of the core beliefs is there are no hard decisions. There are only hard consequences. And so when someone is making a decision, I think humans by nature, maybe it's just our ancestors, avoiding saber-toothed tigers, but we look at a decision. For me, it was one that comes to mind is when I decided to stop chemotherapy. I had no other alternative treatments at the time, but there was a still small voice in my head that said, "You can't keep doing this. You're coming apart at the seams on the inside. You must stop." And then there was this really loud voice that screamed at me of all the things that I thought were guaranteed to happen if I stopped. And they were all negative. You're going to die a painful death. You're going to leave your wife. You're going to leave your children. It turns out that generally, when we think about consequences, we only think about the negative ones. We don't think about all any positive ones that might occur. And so I think what happens in many situations, we pick up the difficulty or the hard consequences that we perceive to have that may happen, and we place them on the decision. When really the decision was kind of straightforward. Like there's that still small voice that's telling you what to do. And without going into details, after I stopped chemotherapy, about 90 days later, my oldest daughter found a trial that I went into. And that trial, along with a few other things, is probably the reason why I'm here 7 years after I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
I just wanted to say that's a very rare thing to be 7 years post stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There's
There's a handful of people, and I am blessed to be in an even smaller group that is there 7 years after diagnosis with no visible sign of disease on the scans. Like if I were to be scanned today by somebody who didn't know my history, they would not see a tumor. They would not know that I had pancreatic cancer.
You were catastrophizing it, which makes sense because that's what doctors are trained to tell you. Worst case scenario, these are the things that can happen so that you're well informed when making your decisions. We all want to be there for our family, so it makes sense that you would start thinking through those. What you didn't think about was 7 years post and what it's meant for your life, what it's meant for your family. And yet there was a still small voice that was gently suggesting that you take that way. And I think it's really interesting to start thinking about how our thoughts. When I started on this journey of recovering, I was so broken and I was just like, I don't know what to do. And my conversation with God goes a little funny sometimes. And he's like, finally, finally, you're ready. Like you're ready to slow down. You're ready to stop fighting the universe.
Yeah.
And it was a gentle voice. It wasn't like, you idiot. I mean, I've been waiting. You're so dumb. Like you did this to yourself. No,
Never.
but that was my voice.
That's right.
And what he showed me was, he just said, I need you to take your thoughts captive. And I'm like, okay. And then what? He's like, you need to measure them up against my character, my spirit. What is that? Love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. I'll tell you, I started measuring my thoughts and I was like, well, there's none of that in there.
No, that's right. That's right.
He said, okay, well, then that's not my voice. That is not your design. We're talking about the universe, and the design for us is to be made in that image of love, joy, which is what we all crave. We want connection, we want love, we want fulfillment, right? But yet the voice in our head is very critical, judgmental, all of these things that aren't going to get us in that direction. And so being able to start discerning the voice for me was really important. And then I was like, okay, so I've got messed up thoughts. These are things I would never say to anybody else. And now, okay, they don't measure up. Now what do I do with it? And he said, you've got to replace them. Like, that's the amazing thing about our brain and our nervous, like, it can be reprogrammed. And so transformation comes through the renewing of your mind. And so I just had to start saying things. I didn't even believe the affirmations, like, we're finding the scriptures that said that I was worthy, but I just said them over and over again and was replacing those thoughts. And over time, what was interesting is to recognize I started to think different. I started to hear something different. And then now, if I hear something negative or critical or judgmental, immediately, like, I'm like, okay, I got to stop that. What's going on here? Why am I feeling that? Why is that coming up for me? And I just thought it was really important to point out, even in your story, how there was a still small, gentle voice. And then there was this catastrophic voice. And
Yeah.
listening to the catastrophic voice, guess what? It tends to end in catastrophic things. Like when I was letting that voice lead my life, it was a disaster. When I started to listen to the small voice, the one that I had silenced, that intuition that you're like, oh, that was a red flag, or that, I used to deny that. Now it's like, okay, let me lean into that. Let me hear that. Let me move into that, because it is peace. It is joy. I just love that you got to experience that, because it is a very difficult choice sometimes, right? When you're sitting there and you're thinking like, I could never do that to my family. It's a pretty powerful motivator to stay where you're at.
Well, I think that is kind of the what I would share with people is we should make. So I'm a big believer in the power of words, and that words that we speak, we hear. It has a double impact on us. Not only do we say it, but we hear our own words. Where other people only say things, right, and we hear it. So I'm a big believer in choose your words carefully. Not that I always do it. Okay, but I'm saying I'm a believer.
Yeah, these are
in doing it.
ideals. These are the things that we want to work for.
Aspirational goals, okay? But I think, kind of what we were talking about in the first episode about, sometimes, to forgive one, you have to kind of separate out the emotion that's preventing you from forgiving that thing that holds on to you. And I think, the core beliefs for me are those things that help me recognize that I need to get, in that example, remove the emotion so you can reach this place. It's like, how do we go through and find where we want to be? And, that voice, some people find it through meditation. I do acupuncture every other week. When I was going through cancer treatments, I did acupuncture and guided imagery and these things. And one of the things I found, my mother read her Bible and prayed every day. My grandmother did. But what I found is that in these techniques, what's really, really important is that we should pursue times during the day. And I'm not preaching because I'm not perfect at this, okay? Far from it. But we should pursue times during the day when we quiet our minds in whatever mechanism. For me, that's accurate. Whenever they start putting the needles in, I go into like this meditative place. And it's in that. You have to be quiet to hear the quiet voice. If it whispers, you have to be quiet. And I think it's important to find ways and find your own way to get quiet. God will meet you where you are. So just find a way. But he doesn't really raise his voice at all. I haven't found that. Like
Right.
if you're a believer and you believe in the Holy Spirit, it just never yells at you. Like he leaves that up to I built the universe, it'll yell at you. Okay. Like I'm trying to keep you from having to confront that part. And
so good.
so I think that's one of my measuring sticks is, it's like, okay, how loud is this? If it's fear, if it's anxiety, it's usually really loud. And there's times for that. There are times. That's why we have it. We have the capacity for fear and anxiety, because there are times when it's actually very appropriate. It will save your life. That's just not every moment of every day. And, so back to a believer in words, one of the core beliefs is never try, always work. And it's, to me, more important than that is like the representation of what you say matters, and because you hear it. And to me, the word try kind of indicates an effort, but it's an effort. The word work to me implies I am doing. Whether I achieve it or not, I'm doing. So and that's not for everyone. I'm saying, people can find their own words that matter to them. But for me, I work every day to not use the word try. I'm either working at something or I'm not working at it, but I'm not trying to do it. It just, for my psyche, trying has less of a commitment. And so if I'm committed to it, I am working on it. And if I'm not working on it, I'm not working on it, but I'm not trying, just not doing it.
Mm.
For me, that helps me have some level of responsibility. It's like, well, okay, you tried. That's great. But were you working? Are you working now? Have you been working on it? Are you working towards your goal, or are you just trying to get there? Because usually to accomplish something, you have to put in a lot of effort, and that's work. And so I like to
Right.
call it what it is. Just face it down. This is going to be hard. It's not a vacation. My point being, I agree with you. Words matter, and what you say to yourself, we do, but we should have an aspirational goal to, as you did, say things that, whether you think that it doesn't really matter, or maybe you don't believe it at all, you are retraining yourself to think differently. Your brain is actually hearing what you say. And especially when you talk to other people, geez, when you say it out loud, don't be like, derogatory about yourself. Don't be self-deprecating all the time. Sure, there's humorous times when but I think, I know I did sometimes when I would be self-deprecating, I was actually like saying out loud something that I really thought. And so we
And
have to be
just,
careful of that.
cloaking it in humor
Right.
or saying something so that you didn't get hurt. Because if you acknowledge that first, then, okay, you can't
Yeah.
hurt me because I just hurt me.
Right.
And
100%.
the other thing about words that I think is so powerful is words are what were used to create the universe. It was through speaking things into existence. And I know my words were creating the reality I lived in, the way
Absolutely.
I saw things. And as I changed my language, as I changed my words, as I was intentional, everything else started to change. And it's not easy because it is a choice. For a long time, I lived in a victim mentality. I was doing the best I could in that moment, but I was not being empowered. I was not seeing that I had another option. And I think part of that was a protective mechanism, because if I admitted that I helped get myself here, I felt a lot of shame and guilt over what I had put my kids through. And so I really had to deal with was using denial as a form of protection, because I also knew as soon as you call something what it is, you either are agreeing, I'm making a choice to do that, or not in agreement, and you have to make a choice to do something different. So if I lived in denial about my situation, then I wasn't confronted with the choice. But that very thing is what was keeping me stuck and doing the same thing over and over again. Being able to acknowledge where you're at, what you're going through, is the first step to being able to even see something different. So tell people how they can connect with you and learn more about the work that you do so that they can have the same kind of freedom.
Yeah. So the book is at Amazon. If you search for my name on Amazon, Andy Campbell, P and a B, it should be probably the first, search result that comes up. You can also check out my website at askandycampbell.com. And there's a lot there today on the cancer journey, revamping that to add more things, but there's a link there to the book as well. And I would appreciate you taking a look at the website. I want to be as transparent as possible. There's nothing about this that's easy. I would never want my words, in a short conversation like this to be taken as, oh, this, these are real struggles, and it is a lifelong struggle, and just the struggle to separate out the things I wasn't responsible for, sexual abuse as a child, from the things that I am responsible for, my reaction to those things and how it's continuing to damage my life. All of this is a struggle. What I would hope that people would take from this is that you should not quit. You should continue to persevere, and that, the summation of your life can change every day. And so just do not quit. Continue to pursue a better life. And I believe that opportunities for that will be presented to you. And then I would encourage you to take those opportunities, no matter, even if it's painful and you have to take some responsibility for what you have done in spite of those traumatic events, then take that on and face it, release it, so that you can have a less encumbered and a lighter load to carry through this life.
Wow. Truly courageous to just acknowledge we're all on this journey. We don't have it all figured out. We're just here sharing our own experiences. Thank you for walking us through your story. I think that is what is so powerful about the It's Your Story to Tell podcast, is that people come on and they are vulnerable and they do take personal responsibility, but they say, look, you don't have to stay here, and then you can get through it. And then you have a gift in your story to be able to share so that it can inspire others in what's possible, because we all need inspiration. Life is hard. This world is broken. We're always going to be facing things that could easily kind of take us out of the game. But when we share and encourage others of what's possible, it hopefully will bring someone hope who's in a desperate situation to say, okay, he did it. She did it. I too can do this. And so if you're listening and you're in that place, I just want to encourage you that it is possible. Reach out to me if you need support. I'm here to help you find someone who can walk with you if you are looking for that support. Those of you who are listening, if this episode spoke to you, I would love for you to follow and share the It's Your Story to Tell podcast, because you can help us keep spreading the message of hope and healing. Thank you, Andy, for being here with me and being just that for our audience today.
Thank you.